There is a study out of the University of California that found something that most people find genuinely uncomfortable to accept. The brain processes social rejection through the exact same neural pathways as physical pain, not metaphorically, literally. Being left out, dismissed, or repeatedly let down by people you trusted activates the same regions of the brain that fire when you break a bone or burn your hand. Now think about what that means for someone who spent years, maybe an entire childhood, experiencing that kind of pain inside the relationships that were supposed to be safest. At some point, the brain does what any intelligent system does when a pattern causes consistent damage. It stops engaging with the source. It builds distance. It learns to function without connection because connection became something the nervous system associates with getting hurt. If you're someone who has pulled away from everyone around you, gone quiet, stopped reaching out, started preferring your own company to the exhaustion of other people, this video is going to explain something about yourself that nobody around you probably ever took the time to understand. Stay until the end, because the psychology of cutting everyone off starts much earlier and runs much deeper than most people ever realize. Think back, not to the last person you cut off, not to the last relationship that ended in silence. Go further back. Because the pattern you're living now, the one where distance feels safer than closeness, where cutting contact feels more honest than explaining yourself, didn't start with the people you removed from your life recently. It started with the first people who were supposed to make you feel safe, and didn't. Attachment research is clear on this. The way your brain learned to relate to other people was built in the earliest years of your life, inside your first relationships, with caregivers who were either consistently present or consistently absent, emotionally available or emotionally unreachable. When those early relationships were unpredictable, when the person who was supposed to comfort you sometimes did and sometimes didn't, when love came with conditions or with silence or with chaos, your brain adapted. It built a model. Closeness is unpredictable. Closeness is where you get hurt. Independence is the only thing you can actually count on. Psychologists call this avoidant attachment, and it doesn't feel like fear. It feels like preference. It feels like you simply function better alone. It feels like other people are exhausting and you have a low tolerance for drama. But underneath that preference is a nervous system that learned, before you were old enough to question it, that needing people leads to disappointment. And that lesson didn't stay in childhood. It followed you into every friendship, every relationship, every moment someone got close enough that you could feel the risk of them. There is a structure deep inside your brain called the amygdala. Its entire job is threat detection. Scanning your environment constantly, assessing what is safe and what isn't, and triggering a response before your conscious mind has even processed what's happening. It was designed for physical danger. But your brain doesn't distinguish between a predator and a person who has the power to hurt you. To the amygdala, both are threats, and both trigger the same response: fight, flee, or freeze. For most people, relationships feel uncomfortable sometimes, but manageable. For someone whose early experiences wired closeness to danger, relationships can trigger a full threat response, the same physiological cascade that fires when your life is at risk. Heart rate increases, thinking narrows, the body prepares to escape. And when that response fires consistently enough, the brain starts making a logical calculation. If being close to people keeps activating this system, the most efficient solution is to stop being close to people. This isn't a conscious decision. It's a nervous system conclusion. And it explains something that probably confuses the people around you, why you can seem completely fine, functional, even warm, until a relationship reaches a certain level of intensity or expectation, and then something in you shuts down completely. That shutdown is not cruelty. That is your brain executing the protection strategy it built when protection was genuinely necessary. The problem is that the strategy doesn't know the difference between then and now. It fires the same way regardless of whether the threat is real or just familiar. Here's something that rarely gets said about people who cut everyone off. Most of them spent years doing the opposite, years of overfunctioning, years of being the one who checked in, who remembered things, who showed up when nobody asked, and stayed when most people would have left. You were reliable in relationships that were unreliable in return. You gave consistency to people who gave you unpredictability. You managed other people's emotions while yours went unacknowledged. Not because you were naive, but because somewhere in you there was still a belief that if you gave enough, if you showed up enough, the relationship would eventually become safe. It didn't. And the accumulation of that, the repeated experience of extending yourself and receiving very little back, is what researcher Judith Herman describes as relational exhaustion. Not a single breaking point. A slow, invisible depletion that happens so gradually you don't notice it until one day you realize you have nothing left to give and no desire to try. And the people around you who benefited from your over-functioning for years experience your withdrawal as sudden and confusing because they never saw the depletion happening. You were too good at hiding it, too practiced at making everything look fine. This wasn't a character flaw. This was the direct result of being in relationships where your needs were consistently less important than everyone else's. You learned to minimize yourself, to take up less space, to keep giving because stopping felt like conflict, and conflict felt like loss. Until the day your system finally made the calculation that loss was preferable to continuing. People who know you well have probably experienced it. One day everything seems normal. The next day you are completely unreachable. No warning, no fight, no explanation, just total, absolute withdrawal. Calls unanswered, messages unread, presence removed as cleanly and completely as if the relationship never existed. From the outside, this looks like an overreaction, like you snapped over something small. But that's because what they saw was the final data point in a calculation that had been running for months, maybe years. Psychology identifies this as the door slam, a pattern most common in people with avoidant attachment and high emotional sensitivity. What looks like a sudden decision is actually a delayed one. You have been collecting evidence, tracking inconsistencies, noticing the moments where the person showed you who they were and hoping you were wrong. And at some point the evidence became undeniable, the hope became exhausting, and the door closed. Not in anger, in finality, because reopening it would require trusting a system that has already demonstrated it cannot be trusted, and your nervous system has simply run out of reasons to try. This wasn't an overreaction. This was a conclusion. And the reason it looks sudden to everyone else is because you processed most of it alone, privately, the way you process everything, without asking anyone for help, without showing anyone the weight of it, because that's what you learned to do a very long time ago. One of the things people find hardest to understand about you is why you don't explain yourself. why you don't give people a chance, why you go quiet instead of having the conversation, stating the problem, giving the relationship an opportunity to correct itself. And if you're honest, you probably can't always explain it either. Except that the idea of that conversation feels pointless in a way that's difficult to articulate. Here's what's actually happening. When you have spent enough time in relationships where your honest expression of needs was dismissed, minimized, or used against you, your brain builds a model of what speaking up produces. Not safety, not resolution, more pain, more disappointment, more evidence that the people around you are not actually equipped to meet you where you are. So silence becomes the rational choice. Not because you don't have things to say, but because experience has taught you that saying them changes nothing and costs you something. Researcher Bessel van der Kolk's work on trauma and the body shows that people who have experienced repeated relational disappointment often develop a deep aversion to vulnerability, not because they are closed off as a personality, but because their nervous system has cataloged vulnerability as a precursor to pain. Opening up has historically meant getting hurt, so the system closes the channel, and what looks like unwillingness to communicate is actually a protection mechanism so well practiced that it now operates automatically without conscious instruction. Here is something you might have noticed and felt strange about. When you cut someone off, when you finally remove the relationship entirely, there is often a feeling that doesn't make sense given how significant the person was. Not grief, relief, a physical, almost immediate sense of calm that settles into your body the moment the decision is made and the distance is established. And that relief confuses you because you wonder if it means you didn't really care, if it means something is wrong with you, if normal people are supposed to feel worse than this. The relief is not evidence that you didn't care. It is evidence of how much chronic stress that relationship was generating inside your nervous system. Stress that had become so constant and so normalized that you stopped registering it as stress at all. It just felt like baseline, like how things are. And when the source of that chronic activation is removed, your body experiences what it has been waiting for: regulation, rest, the physiological state of not being on alert. This is documented in stress response research. Chronic relational stress keeps the body in a sustained state of low-grade activation, elevated cortisol, reduced capacity for calm, a background hum of tension that colors every moment. When that stressor is removed, the drop in activation feels dramatic because the contrast is dramatic. You weren't indifferent to the person. You were exhausted by the relationship in ways you didn't fully have language for until the moment it was gone and your body finally told you the truth. Right now, if you're someone who has cut people off, all of them, or most of them, or just the ones that cost too much, you have probably spent a significant amount of time wondering what that says about you. Whether it means you're damaged, whether it means you're incapable of real connection, whether everyone who ever called you cold or difficult or impossible to reach was actually right. You are not cold. You are not broken. You are not someone who doesn't know how to love. You are someone whose nervous system learned to protect itself the only way it knew how. You are someone who gave more than most people know, for longer than most people would have, to relationships that didn't give back what they took. You are someone who chose silence not because words didn't matter, but because you'd already learned what happened when you used them in the wrong rooms. Here is the principle that matters. The capacity to cut people off is not the absence of feeling. It is the result of feeling too much for too long without enough support to carry it. The walls you built were not a malfunction. They were a solution, the best one available at the time, built from the materials you had. What matters now is not whether you built them. It is whether you are still living inside them when the danger that built them no longer exists. You protected yourself when protection was necessary. That was not a weakness. That was survival. And survival, when nothing else was available, was exactly enough.